When life hands you lemons, you make lemonade. Well, today's guest, a member of the Canadian Speaking Hall of Fame, a serial entrepreneur, was handed way worse than lemons. And you know what? He made way more than lemonade. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Buckle up. This is just a number. Age? It's just part of the story. Whether you're getting a head start or reaching new heights later on, it's all about what you do with your time. These are the stories of people proving that it's never too early or too late. This is Just a Number. Hello, once again, everybody. I'm Daniel. This is Just a Number, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by a very special guest. I have Randall Craig with me today. We are going to get down to business and meet this man who has, I believe, a very unique but multifaceted story that we're going to jump into from a whole bunch of different angles. So, welcome to the show, Randall. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, glad to be here, Daniel.
Thank you. So let's jump right in. You are a business coach, you're a serial entrepreneur, you've had all sorts of businesses that we're going to learn all about, but your story isn't just one of, and I don't want to say just a business guy, but I don't think it's limited to solely, hey, this is just a guy who runs a lot of businesses. You have definitely had your fair share of ups, downs, and everything in between. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how your journey has gone and brought you to where we are right now?
Yeah, for sure. And just for context, I spent 9 years at KPMG doing consulting and in the marketing group. I built a company, sold it, was a senior executive American public company, started writing books. I've written 8 books, started another company. We had like dozens and dozens and dozens of people buzzing around. Did some pretty impressive things. My clients were pretty much the A-list of brand names in the country, if you will. And I wasn't feeling so well. I wasn't feeling so well, so I went to my doctor and asked for some antibiotics. And I'm not really big on drugs or anything. And he says, "Oh, Randall, you got to take a blood test. We got to see what it is. Otherwise, I can't prescribe the right thing, or if it's a virus. So sorry." So I went into the local lab, did the test, and I've never had this happen before, but the lab actually called my house that evening and said, "Please go to your doctor ASAP.
That's
Okay, you want
never
to
what you
talk."
want to hear. Not what you want to hear.
No, no, no. I didn't know they did that actually. So a good friend of mine at the time was chief of medicine at one of the hospitals, and I said, "Hey, can you give me a hand?" And I sent the report because you can get your lab tests online. I sent it to him. He says, "I'll call you back in a minute." Anyway, he calls me back in half an hour. He says, "Randall, I've got good news and I've got bad news." So I
Hmm.
said, "I'll take the good news." He says, "The good news is you don't have bubonic plague."
That's one place to start. Well, that's a big win. Big win.
Now, the bad news is, Randall, I'm sorry to say, it looks like you've got leukemia. Okay, pack up a bag immediately and go down to the hospital, Mount Sinai, because that's an entry point into um, Princess Margaret Cancer Center. Princess Margaret Cancer Center. They don't have an emergency or anything like that.
Right.
So, I went down there. My wife met me and everything. I'm busy looking up on my phone what the heck leukemia is. Turns out that it's a very bad cancer. It's a very, very bad cancer. And so I'm going down there, and they're doing bone marrow biopsies. That's not a pleasant kind of thing. They basically pound a straw into your hip bone basically and extract marrow, and they're looking at it, and lo and behold, I've got leukemia. They're going to check me in, and when a bed opens up in Princess Margaret a week later, in I go there, and I started on this chemo. And I had the bad leukemia. It was coming out of my skin. It was really, really bad. And it's like 7 by 24 chemo. It's pretty strong stuff because blood infuses your entire body, it turns out. And therefore, they've got to take you pretty much down to kill everything, and then hopefully they kill the bad stuff. After 2 months of it, it's a 3-month treatment. After 2 months of it, my parents were there, my wife was there, my best friend was in the room actually. I'm literally on my deathbed, lost like 65 pounds at this point. It's pretty bad. And the doctor said, well, Mr. Craig, we're very sorry to tell you, but it's we're stopping the chemo. The chemo is not really working. Um, it'll just come back. Here's they introduce like palliative doctors, which I now know what they are, to make you
Wow.
comfortable, right? And this is kind of I'm generally a positive person, right? And here
That's a
I'm,
tough one, though. That's tough to be,
zero,
yeah, even the most
yes.
positive person is not going to deal with that well.
So 0% chance of survival, but they said, listen, if we're able to find someone who's a perfect bone marrow match, we you can have a bone marrow transplant, and what are the odds of that? What are the odds of survival there? It's 5 year survival rate was 25%.
Wow.
So I'm thinking I'm looking around and everyone's like, oh my God, this guy's a goner. This is bad. I'm thinking 25%. Yes,
There
sir.
you
We've
go.
won the lottery.
Glass
Yeah.
half full, glass 75% full. Forget the 25%.
Yeah. So it turns out, Daniel, that nobody in my family was a match.
Hmm.
Nobody in Canada was a match. There was one person who was a match in the world. Okay, one person. So that was a big thing. Now I'm kind of like in the zone of, okay, well, am I in the 75% who die or the 25% who live? So anyway, back to the bed, after you have a bone marrow transplant, after leukemia, there's a fairly big recovery. You're highly immunocompromised. You're in the hospital for appointments like 3, 4 times a week. You're very, very fragile. You're still very, very sick after the transplant. It's very hard. It really is very hard. And so my wife says, if you're going to have like 2 years of semi-isolation, what are you going to do with your time? So, going back to work, I'm in the Canadian Speaking Hall of Fame, traveling all over the country to speak at this event, rah, rah, rah. Not something that I'd be able to do. Even getting down to the office was
Right.
not something I couldn't work, right? Thankfully, I had a business partner who was able to step in and still a friend. I'm very thankful for that. I was indeed at the time. What are you going to do? So I opened my big mouth and I said, I think I'm going to write a Broadway style musical.
Naturally.
And then I thought, holy crap, what just came out of my mouth, right? And so my best friend was there, and he says, "Well, Randall, how can I help?" Yeah, so I said, "Well, go to Long McQuaid, the music
Yeah.
store," and I said, "Here's a particular keyboard. Can you rent that for me and bring it right here in the hospital?" Anyway, I was in the hospital for 7 months altogether, and it wasn't easy. I assure you, it was not easy. Um, but every day I would spend 2, 3, 4 hours sitting in front of the piano, actually putting together and creating the music that would go into into this musical. Yeah, I went on Amazon and I got vocal stylings for jazz voicings for choir and arranging for dummies and like all these books, for example, that would change me from somebody who likes to jam and piddle around on the piano to somebody who's actually going to write a Broadway style play.
Yeah.
Right. So that's literally what I did. And right now we're pitching to get it on the stage. It's not on the stage right now. But what we did do is we actually went oh my God, the number of rewrites and rewrites and rewrites, because I know nothing about musical theater other than I enjoy it very much. Um, but after all these rewrites and everything like that, what we finally did, and we got a whole bunch of friends who are singers. We recorded them in my home studio, and like this is kind of what one does when COVID sort of reaches around, and
Yeah.
and I got so much feedback from these community singers, if you will, and back to the drawing board. And then I went and to some of my network, and I met the brilliant guy who teaches theater script writing, and I said, I'd love for you to read the script and give me feedback. And you know, what do I know? I'm thinking that okay, I should put periods here, and the titles have got to be in bold and whatever, because I was pretty hyped up on what this thing was. And so he says, yeah, I'll do it. And I wrote him a check and everything. And then when we got back together, and he says, okay, it's very good. Okay, but it's not good enough. So here's my feedback. And he didn't tell me that shorten this sentence or put a period here or change this font or whatever. He'd ask very difficult questions. He would ask questions like, when the main character said such and such, what was she thinking about? What was in her background to make her say those particular words? You
Interesting.
know, gee, wouldn't it be an interesting thing to explore the relationship between these two characters a little bit more? You know, gee, is this particular scene, how does that move the story forward? Is there another way to move the story forward that might be more interesting? Anyway, all these questions, Daniel, I had no idea. So that was back to the drawing board again. So here's a bunch of songs gone. Here's a bunch of new songs in there. Here's
Hmm.
a whole bunch. Anyway, just a complete rewrite, changing the music and everything. And then we went just over the last year. We did a whole bunch of auditions for professional, musical theater singers. We chose a cast literally, and we spent a number of days in the studio actually recording, with a multiple video camera shoot and everything, recording the whole thing. And like I said, right now we're pitching it. I still have my day job, by the way.
That's
I sold that last company, but I've started another one, and that's kind of the story, that the outlines of the story. There's a lot more, but it's
well,
pretty cool.
no doubt there's a lot more. I mean, we just got started with Tell Me a Little Bit, and we've now got a Broadway musical that's in the works right now, a serial entrepreneur. You've gone through and I would suspect are still in some ways dealing with, what has come of leukemia. I don't know if that's something that I mean, I suspect you're way more out of the woods because you sound great, you look great, and um,
So
we're able to do this. Um,
yeah, and just to put an underline on all that, for anybody who's dealing with a very significant health concern, whether it's what you had to go through or what I had to go through, we're always left with changed at the very end physically
Absolutely.
afterwards, right? I doubt, for example, you're eating as many French fries with or poutine and all that kind of stuff, or maybe you're doing a little bit more exercise, right? And
That's
it's the
right.
same thing when you've had any kind of transplant, whether it's an organ transplant or a blood transplant, as my case was. So in my case, I've got fatigue, right? I get tired very easily. In my
Hmm.
case, I'm highly immunocompromised and always will be, right? There's certain foods that there's an infection risk of, so I just don't eat that kind of thing anymore, right? So
For
so there's
sure.
all kinds of things that you're left with, and face it, here's the coolest thing. Um, I actually have in my body simultaneously two types of DNA,
Hmm.
right? And
Because of the
and
donor.
my original DNA, the one that's obviously faulty, and another kind of DNA that's living in my bone marrow, generating blood with my donor's DNA in it. And of course, eventually my organs, some of them will change to the other, etc. But there's you know when you've got somebody else's DNA, you also possibly have some of their problems too, right? Which you don't know about, but halfway through your life, getting all that kind of thing. So no, it's changed without a question. But
Yeah.
people say, "How are you doing?" I say, "I'm fantastic." Okay, what am I thinking? I'm here, right?
100%.
I'm
Exactly.
here.
Well, I have so many questions, and
Shoot.
this could be a multi-volume episode probably,
Ah,
but I don't want to leave the Broadway musical story so quickly, partially because I'd love this to be the reason somebody picks it up and hears this and says, "Oh my God, I got to buy this thing." But I'm curious, the story itself, did the story and the idea to do it, was that a product of either I'm clearly going to have a lot of time on my hands, so why don't I fill it with something productive? Or is it something you had always wanted to do and really never had enough motivation? Or was the story itself driven by your story? Because I don't know what the musical is about right now. Could you tell me a little bit more
so
about how it came to be and all of that?
so I told you how it came to be from a mechanical perspective.
Right.
But I had we take a look at some stories, Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, Jesus Christ Superstar, right? Leon Uris, no, sorry, in Les Miserables,
Hmm.
okay, he says, there's only so many stories that are to be told, right? And so I had read a story. It's called this something called from the Book of Esther, a very obscure book in the Bible. Okay, that speaks about the Queen Esther, who all of her people are basically can be killed by the king of Persia and his evil advisor. And I
Mhm.
thought to myself, that's the coolest story ever. Interestingly, here's a bit of a trivia. In the original, the word God does not actually appear explicitly in the text, which is very weird. So,
Mm.
so I read that story and I thought to myself, it stayed with me, and I thought to myself, you know, I'm not interested in writing some biblical story, not at all. But I think that the theme of what that story is very much apropos for today, right? The whole question of Me Too, right, or Black Lives Matter,
Mhm.
or misogyny, any of the kinds of big issues that we're dealing with today are actually dealt with in that particular story. So what if I took that story, the bones of that story, and moved it up to today?
Mhm.
So yeah, Esther in the original was called Esther. She's still called Esther. The original of the king, the king of Persia was Aheshvarosh,
Yeah, and
which
Haman
I've
or
updated to Mr. Virius, the CEO.
I,
Esther's the VP, not the queen,
I love
right?
it.
Haman, the evil advisor, has
Yeah.
become Ham, the evil advisor to the CEO, right? Mordecai, okay, her mentor and has become Uncle Mo, right? And so I tell the story in the sense of you know through a lens of diversity and inclusion, where we could say, for example, a scrappy young woman from the hood, okay, and the way the story goes in my musical is that the old VP was quit in disgust for a bunch of reasons, and so they decided to hold a contest to see who would be the new VP, which of course is like a musical singing contest because this is a musical.
Naturally.
And the scrappy young woman from the hood, Esther, decides to put her name in. And so she puts the name in and she wins the singing contest, becomes the VP. Ham is not at all happy about that. So he plots against her and everyone like her. And
Mhm.
meanwhile, Uncle Mo is saying, you've got to stand up. Okay, this isn't right. And so Esther stands up to the uh, to power and makes the case and turns the king and the CEO and turns against Ham, who's eventually strung up just like he had hoped to string up Uncle Mo and Esther. And the good guys win over evil, and it makes a mockery of those who are misogynists or those who are racists, and it essentially says at the very end, that the title of the musical is "Who is Esther?" Okay, who is Esther isn't the heroine of the story. Who is Esther is actually all of us,
Right in
and
society.
and right, as society, it's all of us as individuals, and in fact that we as individuals have got the power to stand up and say, this is what's right, and that's what's wrong, right? And we shouldn't be afraid to actually stand up. Now, I have to say that's kind of the storyline, but this isn't a preachy kind of musical with a message, although it does have a message. This is a
Right.
musical of fun, of humor, of hopefully you could listen to it. Amazing music,
Yeah.
right? Where at the very end, everyone is feeling really, really good, no matter where you're coming from, politically or what group you come from. And it's a funny thing. If you happen to have read the original, okay, you might say, no, that's pretty cool. Okay, but it isn't the original. This is a musical. But the
Yeah.
bones come from there.
That's awesome. I'm surprised because the best stories in the world come from the OG book, right? Like, and so I mean to be able to segue it to society and issues, but to your point, not make it too preachy in such a way that it probably can be easily consumed by the masses without it feeling like you're sitting everybody down and going, you know,
Well, I'll say even more because we're very much, for many people, we're in a secular post-religious world. And the
mhm,
last thing that I wanted somebody to do is to say, this musical is a religious play. No, it has nothing to do with that. This is a play for today,
Right.
right? There's no religious overtones in there whatsoever, you know. But if you do come from a faith background, you'll recognize the story and
Right.
say
It'll be
this
familiar.
is pretty
Yeah,
cool, right? But
absolutely.
but no, that it's definitely not preachy. Okay, but it demonstrates through music, through humor, through the drama of it, through surprise. Okay, that all these characters who develop in a particular way,
Yeah.
right?
And you
So
know what? If a byproduct of it is that somebody does see something in themselves and learns a
yeah.
lesson, then fantastic, right? And so that's amazing. And so was this something though that you had been thinking you wanted to do before the diagnosis, or did this come to you while you had a lot more time with your thoughts?
Um, something I've always enjoyed, sitting down at the piano and sort of coming up with neat chord progressions or neat melodies or jamming and just creating, if you will, musically. So that's one thing, right? The other part of it was I was quite taken by this story and except for some of those, you know, a couple like evangelical Ben-Hur religious-ish kind of takes on the story, no one had actually ever written it. And so, you know, when you're given lemons, you make lemonade. And
Absolutely.
what my lemon was that I actually would have a chunk of time where I can actually devote to the project. Now, for anybody who's listening to this who had a very severe cancer diagnosis, you're in your hospital room and you're puking up and you're feeling awful. And every time there's something that is weird with your body, you're wondering, oh, is this like another thing that's growing inside? Like there's all these things that are going on. Oh, my feet are cold. Oh, my hands are hot. Oh, I can't concentrate. Whatever it is. So you ring the bell and the doctor or nurse comes and no, this is all what's to be expected, not a problem and everything. And then all of a sudden your stomach starts gurgling and then you start to your mind starts going again. Oh, am I going to puke again? Or oh, is there something wrong, etc. So sometimes you'll get drugs, sometimes you'll get, heating pads, sometimes you'll get, some ginger ale. But wouldn't it be an interesting thing that if instead of all that, being so hyper focused on your body, that you would be in the hospital room, sitting on a chair in front of a piano, creating music?
Hmm.
So instead of focusing in on every little thing in your body that's, you're in this creative, bubble, creating all these things. I was very concerned about, well, the noise of the piano disturb everyone else on the floor. And, there's floors and floors of people who are long-term residents getting treated for leukemia and all kinds of other, more difficult cancers and everything. And so, obviously I was there for a long time. Some days I was just not even well enough to get out of the bed.
Mm.
And all of a sudden, people would come by or the nurses would come by saying that, everyone really liked the music, right? They miss having some music being played and
Right.
everything, which I never would have expected. So did I expect to write it at some point? I liked the idea of it, but the expression, um, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Hmm.
As somebody who's a CEO, there's a limit on to how much time you could spend on anything, right? So here you know, I got a chance to do a whole bunch of stuff because I had this very unwelcome break in the middle. I'll give you another example. Um, I've always enjoyed Star Trek, but I've never had a chance to watch every single episode of every single Star Trek series from beginning to end, like the Next Generation, the original series,
Yeah.
like Enterprise, like all these ones. And yeah, I hadn't realized, by the way, how positive and inspiring that is. At the end of every episode, nobody dies, right?
Mm.
Not the main characters anyway, not the main cast members. So I had a chance to do that, or watch every James Bond movie, one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. And that once again allowed me to remove the focus on the really awful things that were happening to my body, right? It
Absolutely.
allowed me to sort of have some entertainment. By the way, the James Bond one was fascinating because it was almost like a social commentary of the early ones where, it's quite misogynist, in terms of
Oh,
making a pass at a woman or certain women's names, etc., towards the very end where he's perhaps overly caring, overly sensitive kind of James Bond. But it's fascinating to see the change in all the characters and how they portrayed the world. So I wouldn't have had a chance to do that.
right.
Okay. And so I decide that I wanted to watch every James Bond at some point in my life? No, but this gave me the opportunity to I decide much earlier. I'm going to write a musical. No, I enjoy creating music, right? I enjoy improvising, right? So here's an opportunity to do something where I never had the opportunity before, and also take my mind off the awful things that were happening in my body. So
Absolutely. And who knew that there'd be a cyclical motivation by playing the piano where you were motivated to do it and then got remotivated because what you were doing was making the people around you happy who were having a tough time as well. Like that's just that's what you went through. I mean, it was a much longer period in the hospital and definitely I think a scarier diagnosis than what I was dealing with, but I can totally relate to the difference between treating it as you know, as positive an unfortunate situation as you can versus just sitting and wallowing. Because I do think there's a massive difference in how you conduct yourself and how your life goes forward on how you, even how you heal yourself, right? Like they got me out of that hospital quicker than a lot of the other people around me. And I mean, I wish I had a drum set with me in there. My God, they might not have been as happy if I was wailing on that in the ward. But it's interesting too. You bring up Star Trek. I just read yesterday. It's a weird segue, but I just read that when Leonard Nimoy did the this for the first time, to Live Long and Prosper, that came from a biblical inspiration of his. That he came up
oh
with
yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've read that before too.
I didn't know that. So it's everywhere. This the biblical and and the old school inspiration coming up in everything that's coming up.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, this is such an interesting story that I mean, there's a before, a during, and you're in, call it the after, but to me, I mean, everything is a during because we make what we're doing as we go. Tell me a little bit more. I mean, first of all, for everybody who's just joining us, I'm with Randall Craig. I should let them know you need to rewind if you're just getting here right now because there's some really interesting storytelling. You can find him at randallcraig.com and also at the Brain Trust, or sorry, not the Brain Trust Professional Institute.com. I do want to hear a little bit about that as well,
Sure.
about what you're doing. Why don't we talk a little bit about you can take it in either direction, the life before or the life now, and what you're doing to inspire people as business leaders as well.
So yeah, so fair enough. I divide my time doing I'm building Brain Trust Professional Institute. It's entrepreneurial training for leaders and their teams. So I'm the only person in the country who's both a fellow certified management consultant and also in the Canadian Speaking Hall of Fame. So part of my life is getting up on a stage and motivating people. And I have to tell you, Daniel, I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm a content-oriented speaker. I speak about, growing your business. I'm a content-oriented speaker who can motivate,
Hmm.
right? And I think, through storytelling or humor or a whole bunch of other things, but typically what I talk about is frameworks on how to grow, right? And whether it's a real estate agency or whether it's an accounting firm or agency or whatever it happens to be, there's a number of frameworks that you could use to grow your business. And typically, the people who are running these places know what they know. They've built a business to a certain level, but they don't know what they don't know. They've never built a business bigger than that particular level.
Hmm.
So that's kind of where coaching comes in for either for the partners or for the CEO. And then below that, there's the question of, well, we got to make sure that all the leaders within the team, the senior management team, okay, the management committee, whatever it is, they're on the same page. So we deliver retreats, 2, 3 day, 1, 2 day retreats. Where we'll bring people through a particular process. And then we've got a whole bunch of other educational offerings for the rest of everybody. A big thing, for example, in many businesses is biz dev. How do you get more work through the door? And there's a lot of, I don't know, conventional wisdom as to how to do that. Well, we've got a particular approach which we think is unique and makes a significant difference. And so we'll train on that. Same thing with management training, same thing with a whole bunch of others. We can drip professional development in an organization. We've got 75 different topics, right? We've got a bunch of online courses as well. So we've got it all. And the idea is if you want to make a change in an organization, if you want to grow an organization, it isn't just top down, it's also bottom up. You've got to have a different sort of stimulus at all levels of the organizations, all different types of roles. And that's kind of where our go-to-market is that yes, you might hire us to do one thing, whether it's speaking at a kickoff or facilitating a team retreat or coaching or whatever it is. But we've got all these ingredients, if you will, and we can bring them to bear, when and if needed. So that's kind of professionally what I'm doing right now.
Hmm.
Unfortunately, with any growing business, what do you do? What do you do with other passions? For example, Who is Esther? My musical. So, I'm not spending, 8, 10 hours a day pitching that, pitching that, pitching that. It's a slow and steady thing. And
Sure.
so between those two and keeping fit at the gym and long distance cycling and everything, I got a pretty big plate.
No doubt. Like, do you find that obviously your history as an entrepreneur and buying and selling businesses has given you the knowledge and the experience to help coach and teach people who are at different stages in their business career? Was your challenge that you ran into with leukemia and all that, can that be looked at as an additional piece, almost a microcosm of what, and I don't want to minimize it, but being a business owner and contingency planning and running into unexpected challenges, do you leverage your experience beyond business into some of the coaching that you do? Or do you
I
keep
think
that a little bit
so.
separate?
No, listen, I think one of the biggest issues that most entrepreneurial leaders have is time, right? Never have enough time. Okay. Sometimes the whole question of how do I develop this work-life balance and still, reach the potential of what I want to do within the company at the same time as, hey, listen, we got kids or we got community involvement or elderly parents or whatever it is that you've got to take
Hmm.
care. So I think that some of the stuff that I did, some of the experience, overlaps and perhaps I've got a little bit of a different thing. I think sometimes, for example, if I'm able to say to a coaching client, okay, so what's going to happen to your business if you get hit by a truck? Okay, if you get a terrible, terrible health diagnosis.
Hmm.
Okay, and the fact that I've had to go through that literally and came out the other end perhaps gives me a lot more sensitivity to some of the things that have to happen to make sure the business is sustained,
For
right?
sure.
Or what you need to do to plan, from a succession planning perspective, just to make sure you've got the bits and pieces in place, right? And you can't do it all yourself in a business.
Hmm.
But there's some things uniquely that only you can do. And
Right.
if all of a sudden you're not there, okay, so what I find it very, very interesting thing. Um, you and your wife run your real estate business, right?
Hmm.
Okay, you guys are the two grand poobahs, right? You've got a whole bunch of competent agents working for you. Presumably they're competent. Presumably
I
they're all
hope so.
making,
Last
presumably
I
they're making,
checked.
yeah, they're making you money. They're fun to work with, right?
Yep.
Like, and everything. But what would it be like, okay, if all of a sudden the two of you weren't there?
Right.
What would happen to the business? The
Yep.
business would go away, right? All the agents would scurry around to other realtors, and some of them may even set up shop. But what would happen if all of a sudden the two of you weren't there because
Hmm.
you got hit by a truck?
Yep.
Okay. Now put that aside. Question number two is, okay, you're in your late 60s, early 70s, and you decide with your gazillion grandchildren and the weather's better in Florida or whatever it is that you wanted to retire. Okay, or even sell the business.
Hmm.
But get yourself out of the business completely. In that particular case, it would probably be a planned process where you'd be selling the book of business, you'd be selling the process, it's selling a real estate agent is not something that hasn't been done before, right? But the steps that you need to do to maximize the valuation when you decide to sell it or sell it, if you will, are in a certain sense the same kind of steps that you might want to do
Now,
as a risk mitigation measure, just in case the two of you get taken out, right? And sometimes people don't see the fact that there's a lot in parallel there, right? So
absolutely.
let's talk about what some of those things are. And you know, you can't set them all up all on day one, and you probably don't want to anyway, right? But at least if something happens, at least you're part of the way there, and there's a bit of a plan,
Right.
right? Right. So
Yeah, no, I agree. We talk about this and we've been talking about this very recently that you want sustainability that goes beyond a complete dependency on one or a couple of individuals because if the whole house of cards falls with one
there's no
change,
business.
yeah, there's a problem there. Absolutely. And that is something that we've been talking quite a bit about lately is, we built a brand, we built a great business, but is it
We
us or is it greater than us? Right?
yeah. So if you're asking the question, it's just the two of you, right? If you solved the problem, you wouldn't be having that conversation. So we should talk off the
That
podcast,
there you go.
okay, and about what that actually means, okay, or different alternatives. But this is the kind of thing that perhaps having gone through the episode of Yuck, that perhaps I might be more sensitive to more
Mhm.
directly, not just because I might have studied this in business school or that I've advised these other clients on similar kinds of things in the past, etc., but because I intimately understand kind of what goes on in your mind when all of a sudden this kind of thing happens. So,
Absolutely. Has your approach to, work-life balance and prioritizing well-being evolved because of all this as well, or were you really focused on that prior to all of this as well?
so I realized very early in my career, Daniel, that I'm only going to be successful if I'm doing the stuff that I love to do. Said another way, if I do things I don't love to do, I'll never reach the level of my capability and I won't have fun.
Hmm.
So it sounds kind of trite for me to say now, I only do what I want to do, but that's actually true, right? I mean, obviously, there's some parts of everyone's job that you don't really enjoy doing as much as other parts, okay? But why in the world would you have a job or a career or a business doing stuff you don't like?
Right. Or
Uh,
a life.
just such a right, right,
Yeah.
right, right, right. So that was my approach very, very early. Even I had some wonderful mentors, okay, and they drilled that into to me quite early on. And when you hear this from a bunch of people, you kind of figure that makes kind of sense, right?
Must be true. Yeah.
I've always been busy. I've always felt that the work that I do, whether it's a speaker or a coach or as just a entrepreneur, um, I really loved it. I couldn't wait till Monday morning, right? It's intellectually satisfying. You get to meet all kinds of brilliant people. You're able to make things happen because of the nature of my business. My fingers are in a lot of different pots, like different businesses, clients, etc., at any one time. So it's very, very exciting. It's very, very, very exciting. And so that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed. My energy level might be slightly less. Okay. The question of is this something I'm in, early, I'm what, 61 at this point? Is this what I'm going to be doing for the next 20 years? I don't know. So long as I'm super happy and I'm making some money, I'm making a difference.
Absolutely.
Probably I don't see an end to it, right? I think that the days of being well, I guess here's an interesting thing. My late father's dad, okay, he had a very interesting career, probably like everyone's grandparents or great grandparents. He lived in Windsor, and when he was, I think 19 or 20, I can't remember, he got a job in his at this little company called Chrysler, which I
Heard of
think
it.
he was employee number 247 or something like that.
Wow.
Okay. And he sort of literally went from the mailroom. Eventually, he retired as a senior VP of HR. So it's like, we don't have that anymore where we start in one job and we continue all the way down. Yourself, you had the Argos, you had, accounting, right? Now you're in real estate. Like that never happens anymore, right?
Right.
It really doesn't for a whole bunch of reasons. So for him, the most fascinating thing, at least, and this is a great example for me, was was he loved in the 1960s, he loved organ music. and he loved it, and he was busy as senior executive at a big company like that. He had no time to learn, and he says, when I retire when I'm 65, I'm going to buy myself a Hammond organ, and I'm going to sit down at that Hammond organ, and I'm going to play, right? I'm going to learn how to play, right? And that's kind of what he wished for when he hit that wonderful age of 65 and officially will retire,
Hmm.
right? Except for one thing, and I still remember as a kid going to their apartment, and magically there's this Hammond organ sitting in the corner, and with all the dials and buttons and levers, and I have to tell you, as a kid, there's nothing more exciting than buttons and knobs and levers,
That's
right?
right.
Right. So this is a very interesting thing. Um, but unfortunately, that was only there for about a month.
Hmm.
Then all of a sudden, the organ wasn't there anymore. And I
Hmm.
asked, what happened to the organ? And he said, I didn't realize that when you're in your 60s, your fingers don't kind of work like they do in your 20s or 30s or 40s.
Hmm.
And I'm really too old to learn because my fingers have a little bit of arthritis or whatever it was, etc. And looking at that organ, okay, for decades, the organ was this, pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But suddenly it became representative of opportunity lost,
Hmm.
right? And looking at it was just too painful, which is why it was sold or returned or whatever, right? So in a certain sense, I think so often, you know, um, you take a look at what is it that you want to do at some point in the future upon retirement. Okay. Or let's just rewind it. When I graduate from university, this is what I'm going to do. Gee, after I'm going to look for my significant other, my son, I'm going to get married and oh, I'll start that once I have kids. Oh, gee, the kids are too, once the kids are out of the house, like you keep on pushing forward the dream as
Hmm.
opposed to saying, how to actually do something. So for me, I always enjoyed improvisational piano. Okay. By the way, it had nothing to do with the fact that he didn't learn. Okay. How I learned to play
Right.
is a different
You
story.
weren't on a
Right.
quest to avenge his or anything like that. No.
No. In high school, I played the flute. I loved playing the flute, and then I started to write some music, doot 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 doot, and then I'd write the music, doot 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 doot, and then I'd write the music. But sadly, and unless I never learned how to do it, you can't actually make harmonies or counterpoints with an instrument like the flute. But you can do harmonies and counterpoints and all that kind of stuff on the piano. So
Hmm.
every day, literally, from I don't know, throughout high school, I would go down to my parents' basement and I would actually plunk out notes on the piano for 2 or 3 hours, right? And then eventually that became more and more playing. So I'm actually self-taught on the piano. I've never taken a lesson,
Wow.
right? So it's been fun doing that kind of thing, but the idea of actually writing a musical, no, that at some point I thought this would be a neat thing to do, maybe in my retirement. Okay. I knew how to play. My fingers still worked and everything. I was and that's kind of how that started.
Wow. Well, hey, the opportunity presented itself in a very strange way, but you took advantage of a really tough time and
Yeah.
put it together. Has has your definition of what success is changed since, you because like you said, when you're younger, it's the same thing for me. I mean, you're in school, everybody's thinking about making lots of money. That's what success is. But I think whether it takes a situation like we've been through or just, growing up a bit, I think what successful is has changed to me. Um, do you look at it in more of a right now thing, or do you have your eyes on a prize always in the future that kind of has been a consistent beacon that drives you?
That's excuse me, that's a good question. I think the one of my books is called The Personal Balance Sheet, a Practical Career Planning Guide. And what that book says is essentially that you know, and I know you're a finance guy at heart, okay? It's not
Kind
a
of,
question
sort
of
of.
assets or liabilities. It's a question of saying, if we spend so much time at our job, 80,000 hours. Why don't we spend our time strategically thinking about it? And when we do that, we realize that there's an awful lot more than work or life. And the personal balance sheet effectively says that there's a number of different attributes. And there's a bunch of different models. This is mine, Um, it's everything from intellectual to financial to career to spiritual to like so you go through all these dimensions and you say, well, what is it that you want in each, right? Okay, sorry. Of that effort points, if you have 100 effort points, how many effort points are you currently actually spending in each of these half dozen dimensions?
Mm.
Okay. And then you say, well, how many effort points would I really want to be spending in each of these kinds of things, right? And so I think a problem that a lot of people have is that they say, well, I'm going to just keep this particular matrix of these things, throughout the rest. As a teenager, you want more money, you have no money, right? At a certain point, you say, well, gee, I really want that social dimension to pop up. I need to find friends or spouse,
Hmm.
and all the family suddenly becomes very big. Okay. People in their 80s, for some reason, everyone becomes very spiritual near the end of their life, right?
Right.
So what we want and what I want out of life is absolutely changed, as I've grown and as my life circumstances changed, right? And I think most healthy people, that's the case. I think some people who really feel they've got bad balance, work versus life, it's a multidimensional thing, right?
Hmm.
And so, what happened with that leukemia and so on and everything. For me, all of a sudden the chapter changed when I got into the hospital. There's nothing that I could do to change the fact that I had cancer. The only
Right.
thing I could do is change how I look at how I
Absolutely.
had cancer. That's the only thing that I can do. And I think most people who go through a terrible health scare kind of realize that too. And some belatedly, but it's true, right? So then it became a question for me: is how do I best use my time while I'm here? How can I do what I can do and not stress about the things I can't,
Right. That's
right?
it. You
And
can
and
only
so
control what you can control. That's right.
Right, and so for me, I remember upon diagnosis, I'm making some calls, and I was in very bad shape at that time. I'm making some calls. I'm calling some family, calling some friends, etc. My business partner, and saying, by the way, I've got leukemia. Okay, this is what it means. This is what it means. Meanwhile, my wife is sitting in a chair. Okay, in the you know the visitor's chair in my hospital room, and she's becoming more and more steamed, more and more steamed.
Mm.
And so finally I hung up and I said, what? I said, What's the matter? Right? And you know what it's like, when you have to ask that question, the answer is you don't know, but I actually didn't know. She says, Randall, you don't have cancer, we have cancer.
Mm.
And we don't realize just how much of an impact our family, our community, our friends, what an impact that has on them, right?
Absolutely.
Particularly for your closest family. And I had a friend who had a terrible brain injury, and he says, "Yeah, my wife suddenly became the CEO of the family. She tells me what to do. I can't do it anymore."
Yeah.
So you don't realize just what an impact. We had one person, for example, who said, how can we help? Something we didn't know very well. So my youngest daughter was still in school at the time, and my wife was coming down to Princess Margaret Cancer Center like every day. And she says, you know what? Could you make like 6 peanut butter sandwiches for us every week, just so that I don't have to worry about making lunches for my daughter. So for like I don't know, about 6, 7 months or so, well after came home and everything. Every Sunday night there was this big Ziploc filled with a whole bunch of sandwiches, literally, all individually packed. And bless her, she was just absolutely fantastic. Just somebody who said, "Yeah, how can I help?" That's an example of community, right?
Absolutely.
Same thing with respect to the people that are closest to us. So,
Definitely.
yeah,
Yeah, no, it can't be stated enough how much the little things make a huge impact and people don't realize it. And we had a lot of the same. I've got four little kids and it was a massive, a massive impact on my wife and on everybody. Um, right now, the only spillover effect is I'm still not allowed to shovel snow this winter, so that's unfortunate. That that one I'm going to pass on to my son. But
which is not a bad thing, or frankly, just pay somebody to do it,
Well, that's it. Exactly. Yeah.
which is the same thing for me.
It might be him. I'll pay him. I'll teach him some responsibility that way.
So I will say, what one of the things that has changed is I'm very big in paying it forward. I've always given to charity. There's no question there. But in terms of where my mindset was, in terms of how I help, and so I've done a couple of things. I'm sure many people listening have done their own thing. So I'll share three things. I'm a volunteer at UHN, University Health Network. I'm in their patient partner program, which means that anytime there's any project, they do a sense of get a sense of your strengths and abilities. Anytime there's a particular project that matches your skills, they attach you onto the committee.
Hmm.
And that way, as the committee is doing this work, it could be strategic planning, or it could be a new technology coming in, or it could be a reorganization, whatever it happens to be. So for me, because of what my day job is and was and continues to be, that's how I've been volunteering with UHN. That's number one. Number two, I've written a 7-page PDF for the families and for the people who've got the ugly diagnosis of leukemia or a long time. It's not medical advice. This is how you actually survive in a long-term critical care environment. And there's been many people who've gotten that document. It's in a hidden place on one of my websites, randallcraig.com/cancer, and it's made a real difference to a significant number of people. And the third thing that I do is the Ride to Conquer Cancer, which is exceptionally difficult because it's 2 days on the saddle, from Toronto to Hamilton, the next day from Hamilton to Niagara Falls. And you're with 4,500 other riders riding, raising money for cancer research. It's pure research. That's where it's going for. And there's about 150 people who are survivors, who've got this big yellow flag at the back of their bike. And it's a very moving experience. It's not a race, it's just a ride.
Right.
And I say that, you know, one of the toughest things about having leukemia or any significant health scare like that is that you're basically a piece of meat in the hospital where they're doing things to get you healthier, right? You're not in control of that much stuff. People are coming through every 20 minutes, 24 hours a day, every half hour, 24 hours a day. You don't get to you barely get to choose what food goes in your mouth, right? Um, to be able to do this kind of thing is incredibly empowering, and it's incredibly emotional. So
Absolutely. Yeah,
always looking
no
for new
doubt.
sponsors and new corporate sponsors, by the way, Daniel, for that.
That's
Uh,
right.
but the
To
idea
me
of
and every,
what,
yeah. Sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
I was just going to say is that whenever you had something big, the question is how do you make a difference and how do you pay it forward?
Well,
And
that's
and
it.
that's one of the things that has changed for me.
That's it. I mean, gratitude is a huge thing, and translating that into service and action is the next step of showing and doing what you can do within reason. I mean, everybody's in a different
Yeah, of
situation,
course.
but I mean that's amazing. I'm curious. I don't think you mentioned this or not. Did you find out who the donor was, or meet, or were able to connect in any way with the person who donated the bone marrow, or that's not something that is possible in the system?
So much like adoptions, okay, you have to write something that says you'd like to meet them, and they, independent of you, have got to write something that says I want to be known, and then the transplant coordinator gets those, and they say, okay, it looks like I could make the introduction. So yeah, it's one guy on the other side of the world who's 23 years old, um, and um, the only person in the world, by the way, who was a donor, a match, I should say. If it weren't for him, I literally would not be here. And so the agency around the other side of the world costs a lot of money to swab people, right, and test them. So they did a fundraiser here in Canada, and they called me and said, we're thinking of flying your donor into Canada for a fundraising event. And the idea is that they would tell the story from their perspective, and then you'll get up on the stage and you'll tell the story from your perspective. And it's kind of funny. They said, "Do you feel comfortable speaking in front of groups of people?" And as a professional
You're like, I
speaker,
think so.
that's not a problem. Anyways, they raised a pile of money. I got a chance to meet this guy and his wife and infant. They've never been on airplanes before, the whole bit, and I send him a note every once or twice a year, and vice versa. So yeah, it's very cool,
That's
very
got to
cool. At some
be,
point, I'll go overseas and I'll meet him on his home turf, but we'll have to wait for that.
yeah, well, that's about as emotional as it gets. That's got to be
You
that
just
that
cannot
hits you in all the
imagine.
feels.
You
That
could
hits you.
not imagine. You
Oh
could
yeah,
not
no,
imagine.
I couldn't at all. I mean, I know how emotional I am just at marveling at what science can do outside of individuals who are giving themselves in such a way. I mean, the medical community, I understand how strained it is, and I saw it firsthand. It's very tough for them. It's easy for us to judge wait times and things like that, but the things that some researcher did and continue to do to figure out how to fix
Oh,
people like us. It blows my mind.
it's
It blows my
it
mind.
truly is amazing. It truly is amazing.
It is. I mean, I want to be conscious of your time here. Before we go, for people who are out there, I mean, on either side, I kind of want to give you the floor here. You've got so much to say and so much good advice. Some people out there might be in a position where they've got a little pain and they haven't had it checked out. Some people out there might be through it or in it themselves. Um, and then outside of the diagnosis, there's a lot of people out there who, to your point, you're motivating beyond it. This isn't about a leukemia diagnosis. This is about having a knowledge and I think a positivity about what people can do when they just kind of put the BS aside and just do it instead of saying later and I've got time. So, what sort of parting words would you want to give, even though you could have parting words that might go for a few hours? If you could sum it up in a little with a bow.
My late karate sensei. I'm a black belt in karate.
Oh,
My
we
late
forgot.
karate
I
sensei.
read that. Yeah, you're a black belt as well. Like let's just throw that in on the side. Writing
Yeah,
Broadway musicals and kicking some butt in the
yeah.
dojo as well.
So he had he basically one of the very interesting things about Japanese philosophy and they um it's not just Japanese, but that's kind of where I spent a lot of my time in terms of learning is that when the samurai sort of go out, their credo every single day is let me live today as if it were my last. And that way, you're not afraid of death, right? You're afraid of wasting the time that you've got here, right? And so for me, you said it earlier on, or we talked about it, you can only control what you can control. But while you're here, if I had all of a sudden, they told me I've got 2 years left to live, that's it. I'd still be doing what I'm doing right now. When I was in the hospital, one of the saddest things I saw was people wailing away, crying, okay, all kinds of dysfunction. Why? This person, for example, they didn't try hard enough in their marriage and it fell apart. This
Mm,
person's estranged with their kids. This person's upset because they never got to where they thought that they should get in their career. All these people spending all their time with regrets. And all I would say is, wherever you are where you are. And you never want to be the person who looks back and says, I wish I did stuff differently.
mhm,
There's a Chinese proverb that asks the question, when's the best time to plant a tree? And the obvious answer is 20 years ago, not now. But the correct answer is plant it now, right? So, for me, I'm busy planting lots and lots and lots of trees. Thankfully, I planted a lot a long time ago as well, right? But if you had this terrible diagnosis, whether it's cancer or something terminal, for example, what would you be spending your time doing, right? And not everyone can afford or has got the flexibility to turn on a dime, but maybe there's a few steps that you can take, right? And that's kind of in my philosophy, certainly when I work with people. But that's certainly one that I personally have taken to heart as well.
Definitely. I mean, those are you manage. I was wondering how you'd summarize it in just a small amount of words, but honestly, we all need to be planting as many trees as possible right now. And you have, like you said, you've got a forest on the go, and I think it's going to keep going for years and years. It's amazing getting to know you. I look forward to chatting more. We're not done. If you thought we were done, this episode might be done. But for everybody out there, I think that this is inspirational, motivational for everybody there. They can find you, like you said, randallcraig.com, braintrustprofessionalinstitute.com. And is there anywhere else if they're looking? I know you gave a great resource there. If people are dealing with some really tough, family health situations, they can get you
Yeah,
resources.
you can go to randallcraig.com/cancer if you've got one of the bad cancer diagnosis. But I'll also give you one other place. If you wanted to get a sampler of the music from my
Yes.
musical, go to www.whoisesther, Esther, whoisesther.com, and you can get a little sense of the music from there. And you now know the backstory, which is also pretty cool.
100%. I think I wouldn't be shocked if someone listens to it and maybe we'll be visiting you in New York so sooner than you think. Sooner than you think. That's awesome. Well, thank you again, Randall, for the time. This has been amazing. I've learned a lot, and it's inspiring to hear your story and awesome to see. Like I said, you're planting those trees. Keep planting. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Daniel.